Hey, how's it going? Bill Lethman here for Money Evolution. In this video, I'm going to be helping you to figure out, is my retirement on track? So if you're somebody that's been planning for retirement or getting more serious about it, and you're trying to figure out if what you've been doing for the last 20 or 30 or 40 years, saving money and investing that, and putting money into 401k plans and IRAs and Roth IRA accounts, how close are you actually to retirement? And are you on the right track to be able to do what you want to do in retirement? That is to have the lifestyle that you want to have in retirement and be able to retire when you want. So that's the topic of this video. I'm going to go through it really quickly, and I'm going to really kind of outline a really simple three-step process to figure this out. But real quick, before I get into the content and the details of today's video, we created something called the Retirement Launchpad. It's a set of worksheets to help you really get organized with your retirement planning. There's some budget tools and worksheets in there. We also created something called the Ultimate Retirement Planning Checklist. So it's a very detailed checklist of everything that you should be thinking about and doing before, in the years up to retirement, and in the early stages of retirement. So we've got both of those guides available completely for free. We're going to put some links down in the description below where you can download both of those guides. I'm actually going to be referencing a little bit of some of the worksheets that are in that Retirement Launchpad here as we go through today's video. So go ahead and check that out. Okay, so is my retirement on track? So again, we're going to go through three very simple steps to figure this out. The first step in this whole process is going to be to prepare a budget. And I know what many of you are thinking. I've tried budgets before. I've never had a budget. I don't like budgets. I don't like to have that kind of constriction on my spending. Well, in retirement, or as you go into retirement, you're going to want to really make sure that you have a budget. It's important for everybody, regardless of how much money you have or how much money you need to take out of your portfolio every year. Because again, once you shift over from no longer getting that regular stream of income from your paycheck or your business income or whatever it may be, and you have to start relying on your portfolio, you need to know how much you're going to need to take out of that portfolio every year. And is that money going to last you for the rest of your life? So that's what we're going to be getting into here. But I like to look at the budget in a couple of different categories, essentially, and kind of breaking this down into its different components. And this is the way we develop these worksheets inside of that Retirement Launchpad. The first one of those is going to be your housing expenses. And everybody's going to be a little bit different here. Most people probably own a house, or maybe you own a couple of houses, or some people own 3 or 4 or 5 houses. Maybe you're going to keep the house that you have, and that's going to be your home for the rest of your life. For other people, they may be downsizing their house. We have other clients that are actually upsizing their house. They want to get something bigger so they can have a spot where all the kids and the grandkids can come back and visit them. Other people may be buying a second home, a vacation property of some sort, or whatever it may be, a lake house, like a lot of people in Michigan tend to do here. But you're going to want to do each one of your houses separately. And that way you can say, okay, what is my house expense that I have right now today? And what does that look like if I want to downsize? What is the cost of that house in terms of downsizing? What are the property taxes, the insurance, and the maintenance and everything? Am I getting rid of a mortgage by downsizing my house? Is that something that is one of the primary goals of doing that downsizing? Or if you're buying another house, you're going to add in those extra expenses. But having those all separated by each particular property makes it very easy to basically just swap one out and say, okay, we're going to get rid of this house, we're going to add in a new house, and then we can see very easily what that net differential is for either the increase or the decrease in those expenses there. So your housing expense is going to be one of those things. You're going to also want to think about what does that look like in retirement compared to what it is today. So if you're paying off a mortgage that you currently have, and that mortgage is not going to be there at retirement, you're going to want to make a special note of that. And then we're going to do the same thing for your cars, any RVs or boats or other toy kind of things that you have. And you're going to want to do a separate worksheet for each one of these. So if you have multiple cars, you're going to want to think about what those expenses are, and then think about what kind of car or expense you're going to have for that in retirement. So for example, maybe you drive a really nice car today and it's something you're not going to keep doing as you go into retirement. You're going to scale that back a little bit and you're going to go with something a little bit less expensive. So you can see again what that differential is, and then start to really kind of put that together and say, how much am I spending today versus how much am I going to be spending in retirement? And that can kind of mentally help you get a little bit closer to understanding how you're going to bridge that gap. Because a lot of people think about, oh my gosh, I'm making all this money today, and how am I going to replace that with my assets? But you got to think about it. Well, there's obviously taxes that come into this. There's contributions that you're putting money into the 401k plans, and then there's other expenses that you may not simply have as you go into retirement. I would say most often people tend to scale back their expenses as they go into retirement, not because they're living on some shoestring budget, but because it just naturally becomes a little bit cheaper there. You know, there's a lot of work-related expenses that you may have too. Dry cleaning and going out to lunch and fuel going back and forth to work and things like that. So thinking about this in terms of what it's going to be in the future at retirement as opposed to what it is today. You might have an RV, or maybe you're thinking about buying an RV. So what is the cost of all of that? You know, if I buy an RV, how much does that cost? What's the insurance? How much am I going to be spending on fuel for it and upkeep? And part of that's going to be a bunch of camping fees and things like that we're going to get involved with. You're going to want to look at that, and the same thing with a boat, you know, fuel and insurance and everything. And again, you can start to look as, hey, we need to cut something out of the budget. Where do we do that? Do we scale back one of these items here? So housing, auto, and then the last one is going to be lifestyle. And this is basically going to be everything else. And it's things like food and groceries, dining out, entertainment. Your travel expense is going to be a big part of it. And again, thinking about what may be different as you go into retirement versus what is it today. So for example, travel I mentioned, you know, you may want to travel a lot more. A lot of people do as they go into retirement. So if there's some big trips or items that you have that you want to spend money on in that regard, you want to list those out and see what are the costs for that. How much are you ultimately going to be spending on travel on a regular basis? There's other lifestyle expenses that may go away as you go into retirement, especially if you've got kids that you're still supporting and paying for their school and their sports activities and different things like that, or helping them get started as young adults. Some of those expenses will probably go away. Hopefully they will go away. But thinking about what is that in retirement. And for some people, we often recommend do a budget where it is today so you can just get a good sense of what your cash flow is, and then what does it look like in retirement. And you can kind of see a nice little comparison of, hey, you know, with what we want to do in retirement, is that higher or lower than where we are today? Is that realistic? And really kind of thinking about that, being very intentional with that particular budget. The second thing we're going to want to do is we're going to start to think about, okay, with that budget in mind, how much money do we need to basically support that budget? And we want to look at retirement, in my opinion, we want to look at it in two phases. So the first phase is going to be what we call full retirement age. And for most people, that's going to be age 67. And full retirement age is actually a term that Social Security uses to determine when your unreduced Social Security benefits kick in. And that's going to be that you can take Social Security early as age 62. You could delay it as age 70. So that's a whole other video, a whole other discussion about when to collect Social Security. But we're going to say, okay, well, what does that look like, assuming you delay taking Social Security to age 67? How much money do you need at that time? So we're going to say, for example, that you need $120,000 a year to live on. And we're going to keep things really simple. We're not going to talk about taxes in this video or inflation or things like that. We're just going to keep it really simple. That's a different video, and that's really something, quite honestly, when we start getting into growth of the portfolio, taxes, inflation, and things like that, you really need software. You really need some kind of a tool that can actually do those calculations. And by the way, that's something we do with both our retirement time machine program and our money evolution plan, where we get into the software of really mapping this out in detail. But for here, we're just going to keep things relatively simple. So if you need $120,000 a year today, and let's say in the year you turn 67, between you and your spouse, if you both turn 67 at the same time, you have $60,000 of Social Security benefits, which means you need $60,000 to take out of the portfolio. And so to do the math on this, we're going to use something called the 4% rule, something I've talked about in many other videos. It's a very popular, simple rule of thumb that basically says that if you limit your withdrawals from your retirement portfolio to 4% or less per year, you have a very good probability that that money is going to last you for the rest of your life. So this original research was done in the early 90s, and it looked at a retirement. Essentially, it was going to last just for 20 years. And so new research is coming out saying maybe it's a little bit less than 4% is what we really should be looking at. But we're going to keep it simple. We're going to say it's 4% just as a quick rule of thumb. So if we do our math, we're going to basically divide how much we need from the portfolio by 4% or 0.04, and that's going to tell us how much money we need to have. And that would be, we need to have $1,500,000. And so basically, we need $1,500,000 at the time you turn your full retirement age to be able to support that $60,000 lifestyle. So the second step of that would be, well, we could start to figure out, okay, well, if I'm 55 right now, and how much money am I going to be saving between now and retirement? What is my growth rate and everything like that? Of course, you know, $60,000 in today's dollars, you might need more money, so we might want to use like an after inflation rate of return, something called a real rate of return, which is net of inflation. So there's different ways of calculating this, but we can just simply do the math backwards. Or maybe we're saying, hey, we've got $1.5 million in our portfolio right now, so you know, maybe we could retire today. Well, the third part of this is going to be, what does it look like if you want to retire early? And this is something that obviously a lot of people would love to do. They want to retire early, but you really need to look at the retirement in two phases. So what does it look like at full retirement age? And we've just determined that regardless of what we do before full retirement age, we need about $1.5 million that can support that $60,000 lifestyle. But if we retire early, and let's say we retire at age 60, and we're going to assume it's a married couple, they're both 60 years old. If you got different ages, one spouse is older than another, and we're looking at that full retirement age, what I would generally say to do is use the age of the younger spouse and kind of go from when they're hitting that full retirement age, even though your actual cash flow graph is going to probably look something like this, where you might have very little or no money coming in, and then maybe one spouse starts getting their Social Security, and that goes for a couple of years, and then the second spouse gets their Social Security, and it kind of phases in. And that's why, again, having that software tool that can really map this out a lot more specifically. Maybe both spouses aren't going to retire at the same time. One spouse is going to work a couple more years. One spouse is going to retire a little bit earlier. So that's all stuff that would come into play there. But we're going to assume that they're both 60 years old, and we're going to assume that they still need that $120,000 a year. So the way we would look at this is say, okay, assuming that they're not going to take that Social Security benefit early, they don't have any pensions, they need to take the full $120,000 out of their portfolio every single year until they get to that full retirement age. So depending on how much money they have in their assets, this $120,000 might be way more than the 4% rule, you know. And so is that okay? And I would say, as long as we're looking at retirement in these two phases, I think that's okay. But what we would want to do is look at, okay, we need $120,000 a year times 7 years. That means we basically need $840,000 to just fund that early part of retirement. So if we're looking at this in total, we would say you need $840,000 to fund the first 7 years of your retirement, and then you need to have $1,500,000 to fund the second part of your retirement. So essentially, $2,340,000 is the total minimum amount that you would want to have at the time you retire at age 60 to be able to fund this. And I know there's growth of the portfolio, but there's also downturns in the portfolio that can occur as well. But that would be the minimum. And again, you'd usually want to have some type of a buffer in there to basically be able to give yourself a little bit more protection on that. Okay, so the way we would set this up and how we would help this particular hypothetical client solve for their retirement is we would set up a bucket strategy. And I'm not going to get into a lot of detail on this here, but just to really quickly help you to understand this. Again, assuming they were retiring today or even in the years before retirement, we would want to start shifting some of their assets out of maybe some of those growth categories, those things that can really go up and down a lot with the financial markets. And in particular, we're not concerned so much with the ups, but the downs. And the downturns can occur on a fairly frequent basis. And even if it's just the short-term downturns, that can really wreak some havoc. And that's one of the reasons that you think about, well, how did that 4% rule come to be? if I'm historically making 6 or 7%, or maybe sometimes people think they're making more than that in their long-term averages, if I'm taking out only 4% but making an average of 6 or 7, what do I ever have to worry about? Won't I be able to sustain that forever? Well, the problem comes not when we're getting the good years, because some years are going to be really good. Some years, if we're talking about our growth assets, they may make 10 or 12 or even 15%, or like the last couple of years, even over 20% if we're talking about the S&P 500. But it's those years where the markets are flat, or even worse, when the markets are down 10% or 20%. So if the markets are down 20% and you need to take out 4 or 5% as a withdrawal, well, now you're digging that hole even deeper, and you don't have the money still in those investments that can recover. And that's completely different than what you were doing when you were working, if you think about it. While you're working, you probably weren't taking money out of your investment portfolio, and you were probably adding to that on a regular basis. So when the markets dipped, you were actually buying more shares of those investments, those mutual funds or stocks or whatever they may be, at the lower price here. So as we look at this, we said, okay, we need $840,000. And again, it may be that we can get some interest on that. Interest rates are halfway decent right now today, but we're just going to leave the interest rate return out of this. But what we would do is basically set this up and have 2 buckets that are really going to cover about 7 years worth of our living expenses. And the way that would break down is we would have $240,000 in bucket number 1, and that's 2 years of the cash flow that we talked about. They need $120,000 per year to live off of. And again, we're not counting any interest that they may earn in that along the way, which means we maybe put a little bit less in there. But that $240,000 should be invested in very safe, very liquid investments, money markets, cash savings, maybe some short-term CDs, something like that, something that may earn a little bit of interest in there. And then bucket number 2 is going to have another 5 years, and that's going to be another $600,000 in bucket number 2. Whatever's left over, you theoretically could put in a growth bucket, and a growth bucket could mean different things for different people. Generally, if you're close to retirement or in retirement, we never would want to take on a tremendous amount of risk because, again, it's going to be a shorter time before we're going to need to take some of that money out. But whatever's left over could essentially go in the growth bucket, or maybe you still want to be a little bit more conservative. Maybe you want to keep a little bit more buffers here. But that $840,000 is what's going to cover the first 7 years. And then because your long-term spending need is $60,000 per year to keep these buckets full. So every year as money basically matures and goes in and replenishes bucket number 1, we're going to need to keep that $240,000 in there all the way until we get to the end. But along the way, we want to start to take some money out of that growth bucket every year, so that we're not just waiting until the end of that 7-year time period to basically say, okay, we've spent all of that money, now we need to fill up these buckets again for the next 7 years and going forward through the rest of our lifetime. We're going to want to keep those buckets topped off. So as long as the markets are still performing positively, you're going to want to take out those extra profits and keep those 7 buckets topped up. The idea with this bucket strategy is that if or when we go through the market downturn, you can let that growth bucket recover for a little bit and maybe draw these down a little bit and have those buckets maybe fall under that 7 years worth of cash flow need, with the hopes that by the time you need to refill those buckets before that 7 years is up, the market would have recovered. And of course, there's no guarantee of that, but that 7 years window, might give you a pretty good opportunity to create a little bit of a buffer on that. And then depending on what's going on in the financial world, you might want to, kind of reevaluate and say, hey, maybe we need to take a little bit less risk, or we want to keep these buffered accounts up a little bit higher, or you want to do things that are going to create some additional income that could take some of that pressure off. So you don't have to take $120,000 out of the portfolio every year, or even when you get to that point where full retirement age kicks in and you got the $60,000, maybe you want to do something that can fill that up. So sometimes people would look at things like dividend portfolios. You can look at an annuity, for example. I've done a lot of videos on annuities, and I did a whole presentation on annuities, the good, the bad, and the ugly. There's a lot to those annuities, but annuity really is one of those things that's designed for retirement to provide that consistent, predictable stream of income for your entire lifetime. Even having some other fixed income, so maybe you want to have a dedicated account that's just going to generate some interest that's going to come in. So something that just has some cash flow coming in, so you're not having to go to that portfolio for that $60,000 or $120,000 per year. So anyway, I hope that was helpful the way we laid it out. Again, the 3 steps are: number 1, start with your budget, know how much money you're going to need to spend in retirement. Number 2, you want to calculate, okay, what does that retirement look like once things sort of normalize and your expenses are normal and you've got all of your predictable income streams coming in for both you and your spouse if you're married. And then what does it look like to fund that early retirement? And there's a lot of different ways to do that too. We talked about a little bit of that, but for some people, we've actually just built a CD ladder and just said, okay, you need 7 years worth of that early retirement need. We're just going to buy 7 CDs, and every year a new CD is going to come due with the interest. We can know exactly what that payout is going to be. Every year a CD is going to mature for $120,000, and that gets us through those first 7 years. So however you do it, you want to understand that. Again, check out our free guides that we have down in the description below: the Retirement Launchpad, the Ultimate Retirement Checklist. We've got a 3rd guide that I didn't mention. It's called Automate Your Retirement, or Retirement Autopilot, and it's about how to set up all of your accounts sort of on autopilot, keeping track of what account Social Security goes into, different payments that may be coming out of those accounts, and really just sort of that framework to basically put your retirement on autopilot as far as the cash flow goes there. And then if you want to learn more about what we do in terms of our financial planning, I think I mentioned it a little bit earlier. The Money Evolution Plan is our high-level, comprehensive, detailed, one-on-one financial planning program. And we also have something we call the Retirement Time Machine, which is a little bit more of a DIY kind of experience. Still gives you access to the software and all the tools that we do. We build out a plan for you. You get a meeting with one of our team members to go through the plan with you, really kind of help answer questions, and we've got some ongoing support for that. But basically, it's a little bit different, lower price point than the Money Evolution Plan, but still a great tool that's going to answer some of those other questions we didn't get into, and that is, what is the impact of my contributions going into that before retirement? What's the impact of the growth and the inflation and taxes and everything like that, and kind of putting it all together. So anyway, check all that out in the description below. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button if you haven't already, and I'll look forward to seeing you back in another video. Thanks.